Hello and welcome back to Daily Revision. Today we're going to be looking at a Christmas Carol quote, which we can use to link to whatever we're given as the extract in the exam. This is happening the day before the exam, so it'll be definitely interesting to see what we can get covered. So our first quote: "In life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole." That's said by Jacob Marley in Stave 1. So, yeah, the idea of the narrow limits is that he's blocked off from the rest of the world, and he was during his life. This links to isolation, so he's faced the same isolation as Scrooge, likely for the same reasons, as we find out later, as he says, money changing hole. This links to the idea of greed. He was materialistic, just like Scrooge, because Scrooge doesn't care about people, he only cared about his money, because he isolated himself due to that. We see that Marley was very much a similar guy. Also, he describes the money changing hole as a hole because it's a hard way out of it, because he was trapped in his fate, and also in his life he was trapped in that addiction to make money, and it basically controlled him by shutting him off from the rest of the world in a similar way to Scrooge. So if you think about this, we can link this quote to basically a lot of questions about Scrooge and about how Scrooge acts in the start of the novel, because Marley acts in a very, very similar way. And we obviously see Marley's fate, he's trapped in it, but Scrooge finds a way out of it and is warned by Marley. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business." The important bit to this quote we want to remember is that mankind was my business. That key part, as long as you get that, is a good link anyway. So, because we find out that he's now learned that people are more important than money. And yeah, if you use the next bit, you'd see that there's repetition in "what's my business," showing that he has a lot of regret for his actions in his life. Also, the idea that mankind being someone's business links to ignorance and want, because the idea of ignorance and want is that these kids are left on their own starving and it's really bad for them. However, if mankind helped these people, everything would be okay and everyone would be happy. So it's the idea that we should all look after each other, which links to the ideas of Dickens. So next, the bit about charity in this is very important if we're going to link it to Scrooge refusing to give charity money when he said, "Are there no prisons in Stave 1?" So again, we can link this to Scrooge and how he is kind of bad and how he changes in the future, and he begins to agree with this philosophy. We could also, in a way, link it to Fred and how he's a good guy and he acts like this in the first place. So yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about. So next, "I wear the chains I forged in life. ... Is its pattern strange to you?" That's another one by Jacob Marley in Stave 1. The bit that says, "Is its pattern strange to you?" implies that Scrooge may face the same fate as Marley, which we know he will if he doesn't turn back from doing all his bad actions and become a good man, which he does. And then the bit "I forged" kind of shows that it's Marley's own decisions that led to this happening to him, so it was self-inflicted. So if Scrooge goes around making different decisions, he can save himself. So again, this is a thing we can link to Scrooge. Next, we got a quote from Scrooge, a description of him from Stave 1. So it goes, "As solitary as an oyster." The idea of being solitary is that he's alone, but it's also his own decision to be alone. Solitary we wouldn't always consider a negative word, because it can be a good thing, so that kind of links it to being his own choice. Other people would let him in, he just doesn't want it. The idea of an oyster is that he's self-contained. It's also strong-shelled, so he doesn't care about other people and it'll lash out. But also that it's soft inside, so it shows a potential for change, which could show that he's a dynamic character. So we could link this, of course, to the end of the novella and description of Scrooge in Stave 1, of course. So another description of Scrooge in Stave 1 is hard and sharp as flint. The word hard is important because it snaps easily and it shows that Scrooge at the start is quick to anger. Also that he's unemotional, and sharp, that he's smart, but he's also cynical and doesn't trust others. And flint is sort of like a description it links to the first ghost. So if we think about the first ghost, it is like a massive candle. Its head is on fire, and it kind of foreshadows that in a way if you think about it, because of the creation of fire. Also, it shows the ability to change as lighting a fire changes the things in it into something new and brighter and better. So next, let's look at our next quote from Scrooge. Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? So he says this in stave 1. He kind of like mimics a lot of Victorian beliefs, which Scrooge would probably believe in, such as the poor are lazy, so they should be sent to workhouses, and the poor are natural criminals, so they should be sent to prisons. So this would be linked to something about Scrooge's beliefs, or even something about some of the poor, like Bob Cratchit. If we had to write a thing on poverty, we could link this into it on rich people's attitudes towards it, which would be interesting. Of course, the writer of the novel, Dickens, would disagree with these beliefs, as he thought that this was a problem in society, which he highlighted through this book. And this thing is, of course, repeated by the Ghost of Christmas Present, after Scrooge feels sympathetic towards ignorance and want in stave 3. It has a big impact on him, as it really makes him think over his words and think, should I have said that? So next part, darkness was cheap. Scrooge liked it. This is another description of Scrooge from stave 1. So despite being rich, Scrooge is still stingy, so he still cares a lot more about saving his money, even though he doesn't have to. So that's the idea that he cares so much about gaining money that he doesn't want to give any of it away. So he doesn't want to give it to anyone because it's his, it belongs to him. Shows him to be self-centered. Also, the idea of darkness links that he is living badly. It also links to the repeated theme of light, that there's a side of light and a side of darkness. Also, the idea that he's living in darkness shows that he's ignorant. He doesn't understand what's going on in the world, and doesn't understand that he should be looking after others. So yeah, next, O. But he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. This is another description of Scrooge from stave 1. The idea that he's tight-fisted shows that he's unempathetic and often angry. The exclamation point at the start emphasises the point, so it shows that everyone believes this really strongly. No one thinks the opposite of this. And also, the idea of the grindstone shows that he works hard to make money. And it's almost an obsession that forces him to force others to work hard for him, because he's obsessed with getting this money in. So next, a solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still. So this is young Scrooge's description in stave 2. It shows a different side of Scrooge, because it's him when he was much younger. So the idea of him being neglected creates sympathy for Scrooge. Also, the idea that he's neglected by his friends kind of makes us understand that maybe he's learned not to trust people. And maybe it's like deeply ingrained in him that he's like that. Also, the idea of him being a solitary child, it's the same word as stave 1, where he's described as solitary as an oyster. And I think this is an important thing we can link together. Repetition of words spread out in the text is really important and really cool to point out. So the past made him who he is today. So he's still as solitary as he was back then. He's never changed. And also, the idea, it makes a reader think, if he felt pain like that as a child, why would he stay like that? Why wouldn't he try and break out of it and become something different? And maybe it's just because he doesn't know how to. As we see, the ghosts teach him things throughout the novel. So next, let's go on to the next page. So we've got a big amount of Scrooge today, which is important to remember as he is the main character. So let's start with another Scrooge description. So, though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. And this is in stave 3, when Scrooge meets the second ghost. So after the first ghost, Scrooge saw that he made mistakes and he felt guilty about it, so he didn't want to look up at the other spirit. Also, it's the idea that Scrooge didn't want more to feel guilty about, because he knew that this ghost would try and teach him a lesson as well, which is an important thing to remember. we also see Scrooge ignoring the kindness of others directly, which is similar to what he does with Fred a lot in the play. Not the play, the novel, as Fred often tries to tell him, you should hang out with us, and Scrooge is like, no way, don't say it like that in the exam. I'm not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. This is what Scrooge says in stave 4 about himself changing. So the idea that he's not the man he was is that he's completely changed. He's a dynamic character, and he turns into the opposite of what he was at the start of the novel. He will be nicer and treat people better because he's changed. Also, the idea that he must have been something shows that he doesn't really know what he's been. He wasn't aware of what he'd become before the ghost taught him a moral lesson. He had no idea he was like that. He was very ignorant, I guess you could say. He also didn't know the consequences of his actions and how much he had hurt others without realising. So next, let's look at Dismal Little Cell. That's a description of Bob Cratchit's workplace in stave 1. So the idea that he works in a dismal little cell, the idea that Cratchit is trapped in a terrible job due to Scrooge's bad treatment of employees, and the actual workplace is a terrible environment because Scrooge doesn't care about the people there. Also the idea of him being trapped in a metaphorical cell, that poor people in Victorian era had few options and job opportunities, meaning they had to put up with this to support their families. So the idea that he had to deal with someone as bad as Scrooge just to continue surviving, and that a lot of people would have to do the same in the era. Another thing that Dickens is trying to say, that this is wrong. People should be treated better in their workplaces. So next, I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. So this is said by Bob Cratchit in stave 3. Cratchit is grateful to Scrooge and says it to his entire family, despite Scrooge being a terrible boss, because he knows he's fortunate to have a job in the first place, and he's just happy to spend Christmas with his family. So he shows, despite being really poor, he's just still happy to be around his family. And although he's in desperate conditions, they're still having a good time because they're family together, and Scrooge is having a bad time even though he's rich. So that's an interesting thing to think about. And yeah, you could link this to things about the poor again, how they were treated in the Victorian era, but also things about Scrooge. People allow him to get away with what he's doing because of his status, I guess. So next, he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome. His eyes sparkled. This is used to describe Fred in stave 1 when he's going to visit Scrooge. The idea that he glows implies that he radiates light and spreads goodness with others, so he gives other people goodness. Also, the idea that he contrasts to Scrooge's darkness, because it's revealed before Scrooge liked the darkness, and it's shown that this guy's glowing, so he's really the opposite. He's spreading goodness, not hate. Also, his eyes sparkled, so this contrasts a lot with Scrooge's cynicism. So Scrooge doesn't trust others, tries to block them out. Fred has a lot of optimism, so he sees the good in everything. And this is also shown with the times he tries to help his Uncle Scrooge and that sort of thing. So if you ever have a question about Fred, this is a good one to bring up. It's a different part in the play. But also, if you ever have anything about Scrooge, because you could say, well, Fred's shown to be the opposite in what Scrooge should have been, what Scrooge could have been if he was the best person he could be. So next, let him in. It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. That's Fred in stave 5. He's shown to be an example to the upper classes, Fred is, as he says, let him in. He says, treat people well, regardless of their past. That's what he's doing, because he's letting Scrooge in. Even though Scrooge was incredibly rude to him in stave 1, he doesn't care, he's forgot all about that, he's gone past it. This is an example to how the upper classes should act. They shouldn't have such animosity towards people over long times. They should forgive people and try and help them. So next, from the crown of its head there sprung a bright clear jet of light, by which this was visible. And that's the ghost of Christmas past in stave 2. The jet of light is thinking the idea of metaphorically shedding light on Scrooge's past and all the mistakes he's made, but also the reasons why he's miserable and alone. So it really tells us how he came on his journey to where he is today, and also the problems and mistakes he made. So next, light makes Scrooge uncomfortable. We can see this here because he lives in the darkness a lot and he tends to stay away from emotion. So this bright light is shocking to him and he doesn't like it. He doesn't want to remember his past. So next, come in and know me better, man. This is the Ghost of Christmas Present in stave 3. And he's encouraging Scrooge and also welcoming him. And Scrooge doesn't welcome others, so it's nice to see someone welcoming him in, and him actually going there, showing that he changed from before when Fred welcomed him and he said no. Know me better. This is the idea of knowing the Christmas spirit better. So if he knows the ghost better, that will allow him to see the true meaning of Christmas, because that's what the Ghost of Christmas Present is all about, really, at least in the first bit. So if he knows this Christmas spirit better and the true meaning, he will know more about the greatness of family, generosity, and goodness, and how he can help people in the world and become a better person. A solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. So this is from the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come in stage 4. And the idea that it's solemn is the idea that the ghost has serious truths to reveal. And the serious truth is the thing about Scrooge's death. And in the future, Scrooge is going to die. And it's an incredibly solemn thing. It's serious. He won't be able to come back from it, quite literally. And then it's described as like a mist. This implies that the future is not grounded and it can be changed. Scrooge can be saved if he repents on his ways and becomes a good man and fits into society. So that was our thing. A Christmas Carol. Thank you and goodbye. I might do more of these day before exams for other things. It was an interesting experiment. Goodbye.